Alright, lock in because today I'm going to be giving out player grades for every contestant on Survivor 46. I've seen player rankings where they rank like 1 through 18, but I've never been about rankings like ever. It's all about splitting hairs. Making a tier list is easier, so I'm going with the tier list that has grades on it rather than ranking in order. Like, I'm just going to give them a grade. Also, this is going to be in elimination order. So yeah, with that out of the way, it's time to get in here. Let's go. Jelinsky played an F-tier game of Survivor. Now I will give him some credit because he was included in on an alliance, which is more than I can say for the person that I'll be talking about next. Like, that's why if these were some actual rankings, he'd probably be on top of that person. But yeah, he just didn't play a good game. He quit the Sweat and Savvy challenge, which didn't sit well with Q, and in the card game, he folded faster than a $5 lawn chair and lost his vote because he was thinking about making connections with the other tribes when they were nowhere near the merge phase. All of this quitting stuff got him blacklisted from alliances because he wasn't a reliable ally, he had no vote to give, which is the most powerful thing in Survivor, and because he didn't have a vote, he couldn't play his shot in the dark. He really messed up, so he couldn't get any other grade like other than an F. Jess played an F-tier game of Survivor. She didn't really connect with anyone and she wasn't in any alliances. When Kenzie tried to get her in a potential alliance, Jess didn't give her much, so Kenzie passed because she determined that Jess wasn't a strategic player. She was a challenge liability for sure, and to make things worse, she basically had to be taught or like convinced into playing the game. When Jess was on the hot seat, Tiff had to push her to look for idols. Speaking of idols, Jess was so bad at looking for idols that Q had to literally hand her the fake idol that they wanted Jess to find. This was because they wanted her to use the fake idol instead of the shot in the dark, which eventually happened as Jess was voted out. Bad challenge ability, bad social game in terms of connecting with people, bad awareness. Like, wow, not only is she getting an F, like she's not even a Survivor player at this point. Like, she just brought nothing to the table, so she just had to get an F. Randen played a D-tier game of Survivor. He's a tough case because he got medevaced so early, but from what was shown, he was able to be less of a target than Venus, but he just wasn't part of that Tevin, Soda, and Hunter power structure that was seemingly in control. Not only that, but he wasn't even aware that Hunter was running the game when Venus tried to tell him that. The only real positives about his game is that he found a beware advantage and he was able to make an alliance with Venus, someone on the bottom, which is good play to connect with the person on the bottom. Like, that's an easy ally. But outside of that, he didn't really show much because he got medevaced in episode 3, so a D grade is the best that I could give him. Bhanu played an F-tier game of Survivor. He was in a solid spot to begin with, but he only survived the first 2 tribal councils because his competition in Jelinsky and Jess were literal NBA 2K brown shirts. I'll give him a pass for almost giving away that Jelinsky was going to be voted out because it was very obvious and it didn't really matter at all. Like, the guy had no vote, no shot in the dark, no idol, so it didn't really matter. But then in the next episode, he wasn't part of the main Tiff, Kenzie, and Q power structure, meaning that he had potential to go home, and even when they picked him over Jess at Tribal, Bhanu almost gave up that Jess was getting voted out, which wasn't good because the 3 gave her a fake idol so she would play it instead of her shot in the dark. Bhanu almost ruined this plan, which put him at the bottom. But his game got even worse. When he went on the journey, he not only told Liz and Ben that Tiff and Q were tight and Kenzie was running things, but after he got a second life in the game because of the Randen medevac, he ruined it by telling his tribe what he said on the journey. This got Q to forgo this Boston Rob and Philip type of dynamic that he wanted to have with Bhanu, and he voted him out. Like, Bhanu was voted out unanimously because he was untrustworthy and he had to be coddled, and with no vote, he literally had nothing to give, so he just has to get an F. Jem played an F-tier game of Survivor. A positive is that she was in on the Charlie's Angels alliance with her, Charlie, Maria, and Moriah, but closer relationships formed between Charlie and Maria, leaving Moriah as Jem's closest ally, and out of those two pairs, Charlie and Maria had the better relationships to play the middle and decide where they wanted to go, which ultimately they didn't pick Jem's side. They voted her out because she was playing too hard, making it obvious that she was targeting Tim and Ben. Also, I didn't like how she got the beware advantage, then planted it somewhere else instead of hiding it, because once the tribe found out that there was no beware advantage in that spot, they knew that someone had it. She just didn't play a good game, so she had to get an F. Moriah played an F-tier game of Survivor. A lot of F's so far, but this was just a cast where the gameplay level was very low. Like, there's gonna be seasons like that. Anyways, she gets an F because she had to be taught how to jump. Nah, just playing around, but she gets an F because after being left out of the Jem vote and being in the minority, she went into Murgatory and wasn't honest about her situation. She told everyone that the Siga tribe was strong and together, which set up the strategy for that round. It was better to get rid of a member from the strong Siga tribe rather than a number from the fractured Nami tribe. If Moriah was honest about her situation, then maybe she could have been in alliances, and maybe that would have made it more of a debate on whether a Siga or a Nami should be taken out, but that wasn't the case, so she has to get an F. Tim is going to get a D grade. Although it wasn't really that active, I've got to say, in that whole Jem and Moriah versus Ben and Tim thing, Maria and Charlie took Ben and Tim's side, so that's got to count for something, that they built enough trust with the power players despite Jem trying to say that Tim found the idol. I'm just assuming that stuff. That's why I said it wasn't active. Hey, they got to show that in the edit, but I think clearly they built up enough trust with Maria and Charlie, so I'm just taking it for what it is, I guess. And it was impressive how Tim caught on and confronted Jem about moving the advantage and having a women's alliance. That was impressive, but that's where the impressiveness ends. He was completely wrong about his relationship with Maria when offering her up for the +1 alliance. Could have offered up Ben, and he didn't take any advantage of this +1 alliance that could have formed when he went on that journey with Q and Hunter. He could have had a strong 6, but his lack of commitment ruined that alliance. He was Siga strong forever, and that was his downfall, as he ended up on a split tribe with 4 of the 6, but he wanted to target Hunter when it should have been an easy Ben vote. He didn't follow Q's game plan, so he got himself voted out. I gave him a D grade, but I can actually see an F grade as well. It's just that for what it's worth, he had a few more impressive moments than the F tier players, which is why he gets a D grade. Soda played a D tier game of Survivor. Really, she didn't have to play Survivor that much because Nami was so dominant, but her big positive is that early on, she was part of that Soda, Tevin, and Hunter power structure. But her game went downhill at the split tribal when she was voted out because she was a social threat. Tevin even turned on their alliance to make this move. It's a tough grade because they were saying that she was a threat, but I can't really justify giving an early jury member a high grade. The way that she was talked about would suggest that she was a C+ type of player, but that stuff just wasn't on the show, and she didn't really get that many tribal councils to show that off, so I have to give her a D grade. Tevin played a C tier game of Survivor. Although he didn't really get a pre-merge tribal council to show any of this off, from what was being said, he was running the Nami tribe with that 3 of himself, Hunter, and Soda, and he had a really close bond with the strongest physical player on the tribe in Hunter, the Andy Griffith alliance. He was included in on the Journey 6 +1 alliance that ended up tanking by it. It's still something. He even played a big role in the Soda vote and got out a huge threat, apparently, while still having his alliance with Hunter. He played a good game until he tried to take credit for the Soda move, which isn't good to take credit like that before the final 3, and Liz got mad at this, and based on the edit, Liz was the one that sprung the Tevin plan into action and got people to see how big of a threat he was. Tevin really played a good, probably B tier game up until he took credit for the Soda vote, so that has to bump his grade all the way down to a C. Hunter surprisingly played a C tier game when, honestly, I was expecting him to perform better. He was a really good challenge beast, especially in the tribe phase, which added a lot to his value. It made it so that he could really never be voted out in the tribe phase. Also, he was in the dominant power structure with him, Tevin, and Soda, and he was included in the +1 alliance, and he found an idol. And even though he was targeted by Tim, it was impressive that as a challenge beast, Hunter was able to survive that round with the relationships that he built with the +1 alliance. But he couldn't save his #1 ally in Tevin, which is somewhat fine. There's some merit to saving the idol for yourself, but in the very next tribal council, he didn't use his idol despite the same group of people voting out his #1 ally in the previous episode. That's a very big reason why his game wasn't as impressive. The awareness just wasn't there, but he has to get at least a C because he was a powerhouse when it came to challenges. Tiff played a B tier game of Survivor. She was really running things on Yanu. She was never really in danger and was so safe that she got to mess around with some fake idol shenanigans. And when it got to the three of them, her, Kenzie, and Q, it seemed like she was in the middle of that and she could pick which one of them she would take further into the game if it came down to that. Also, she was in the 6 alliance. At the split tribal council, she didn't get Ben out, instead Tim went, but she got rid of a Sega number, which was all that was needed. But her game went downhill when she lost trust with Q by going against the 6, winning Moriah out over Venus, and this made Q want Tiff out, and he told people about her idol, and this idol stuff just never left Tiff. Although she didn't leave in the following episode, it was used as a reason for a potential blindside plan. Then in the episode after that, she was voted out with an idol in her pocket and she just mishandled the Q relationship, so laser focused on hating everything that this guy stood for when if she had Q on her side, she could have forced a tie on that vote. It's a solid B tier game of Survivor, but it would have been way better if she handled the Q stuff better. Venus just flat out played an F tier game of Survivor. I really don't care how far she made it, she just played an F tier game. First, she was sneaky because she was looking for advantages, but then there came a point when she was rude to everyone, and if not that, she just had very little social awareness. She didn't know how to talk to people in a productive way without trying to control everything. No one wanted to work with her. Even when someone wanted to work with her, Randen got medevac from the game, so I'll give her that. I'll give her a pass on that, but I can't give her Kenzie wanting to work with her and saying that they're #1 allies, because that was basically out of necessity because they were the only 2 people remaining that got left out of the Tiff vote. Even when she was surviving all of those rounds, there was no one oh, we gotta get Venus in on this plan, gotta work with her because she's so trustworthy. No, that never happened at all. People were dragging her through the game and she reached her limit at the final 7 where she got voted out with an idol in her pocket. And it's funny how at that tribal council, she was arguing with Q about being in the previous 2 votes before she got left out of the Tiff vote just to get blindsided here. She was focused way too much on those iconic moments, those TikTok edit type of moments rather than playing the game. So I absolutely have no problem with giving her an F grade. Q played a C tier game of Survivor. He was one of the main 3 power players on Yanu, deciding where the votes would go, and even though he had to give up Bhanu, I don't really see that as a terrible thing because he moved forward into the merge with a solid 3, but his merge was terrible. The 6 didn't blow up because of him, but he was too locked in on the 6, trying to have this 6. It just clearly wasn't working. Also, he just had to have everything his way, which made him a fun character, but no one was really messing with all that last minute plan changing. Then he completely tanked his game, his jury, his respect, all of that by saying that he wanted to quit, and from that point on, he was at the bottom, and whenever he survived, it wasn't because of him, it was because he wasn't a threat and people were using him as a way to get out bigger threats because he was so far on the bottom, that was his only way of staying in the game. Then he got voted out with an idol in his pocket, knowing the dynamics, knowing that the only person that was really rocking with him was Moriah. It's really a D tier or F tier type of merge game, but his pre-merge gets his grade up to a C because he was solid in the pre-merge. Moriah is going to get an A. She and Charlie controlled the game up to a point. They controlled the Gem, Soda, Hunter, and Tiff votes, and they were part of the 6, and they really worked with everyone, I've got to say. They had good relationships across the board. Where Moriah's game tanked was when she made Q her #1 ally, someone that was talked about as a villain, which it is good play to bring in someone on the bottom, but they just never stopped hating on her for that, especially since Q and Moriah kept on going on rewards together and everyone was getting salty. Also, at the final 6, she had the intel that she needed to tell Q to play as idol and get Charlie out of the game, but she overestimated her relationships, which was a big mistake. Then at the final 5, when she lost to Kenzie and Liz, she was just a sitting duck, like nothing could be done at that point. Even though her game tailed off at like that final 7, final 6 type of time, it was still an overall dominant game, good enough to get an A grade. Liz played a B-tier game of Survivor, very surprisingly, because whenever I hear Liz, the first thing that comes to mind is that Applebee's meltdown and just acting like a toddler, I would say. Not a good look, not good jury management, like she was never going to get Q's vote. But looking at her game overall, I was actually impressed because the way that the show presented it, she was a big part of the Tevin vote out. Also, although she was mad at Q for the Applebee's stuff, it was good how she was able to put all of that behind her and make a rational decision for her game by voting Tiff out over Q. And while I don't like it, smart thinking on her part for helping Kenzie win the challenge to get Moriah out, the biggest threat in the game at the final 5. She lost final 4 fire making, but that's not really a situation where I feel like she could have done something different or tried to get a better relationship with Ben, because Ben and Charlie were so close, so like that was just never happening. She just simply lost a fire making challenge, like that's all, it happens. Liz very surprisingly played a good game, so she's going to get a B grade. Ben played a C-tier game of Survivor. Who is Ben anyways? That's why I can't really give him anything higher. He was a likable guy, which kept him from being a target in that mid-merge and in-game section of the game, but he drove nothing. He wasn't making plans, he was being included in on plans, which made it so that he really had absolutely nothing to claim at that final tribal council. He was a follower and that was on full display. It was a good enough game to get to the end, so I can't fail him, but he was never really going to win, so I can't give him a higher grade than a C. Charlie played an A-tier game of Survivor. He just flat out ran the game with Moriah. They decided the Gem vote, the Soda vote, the Hunter vote, the Tiff vote. Charlie controlled the Venus vote, and he got taken to the end by Ben using the bond that they built, and he didn't even have to touch fire making. Charlie was working with just about everyone at one point in the game, and he could claim a bunch of moves. The only weakness in his game wasn't his social game, like he had a good social game. I would just say that it was an aspect of social game, like relationship building, making people want to vote for him. Charlie was solid at every aspect of the game, but it seemed like people didn't connect with him on a personal level like they connected with Kenzie. For me, that one aspect shouldn't override everything else that Charlie brought to the game that was just flat out better than Kenzie, but I don't decide how they vote. That's on the jury to vote how they want to. But just because he didn't win, that doesn't mean that he wasn't an A-tier Survivor player, and I'll just say it here, he was the best player of the season, definitely. Kenzie played a C-tier game of Survivor. She was a power player on Yanu, but also like she wasn't really driving most of the votes. Like all of the targets on that tribe were very obvious and almost predetermined to an extent because she was in such a tight alliance with Q and Tiff, and their competition was downright awful. I would say that it was impressive how she was able to lay low in the merge and like never really be a target, but that was because she wasn't driving anything, which would be smart if she was holding off then taking over at the end, but that didn't happen. Also, a huge hit to her game is this 2-episode stretch where she wanted to blindside Tiff, but Moriah and Charlie got the votes onto Hunter. Then came the episode of the actual Tiff blindside when she was left out of it, so at that point she had absolutely nothing to claim. Then after that, it was smooth sailing to the end because everyone decided that Q and Moriah were villains, so they spent like the next 3 rounds targeting them until they got to the final 4, where Kenzie's game was all about social game, but she couldn't convince Ben to take her to the end of the game. She had to make fire. Also, she won and lost votes at Final Tribal Council, so she really had a shaky game that no one really knew how to feel about except for like Tiff, I would say. That was her one only like guaranteed jury vote. She seemed to have got votes because she was more liked than Charlie on a personal level, which is a valid way to win the game, but I just can't ignore all of her missteps, like failing to make the Tiff move and being left out of the actual Tiff move, having to make fire as a social player that should have been able to convince Ben to take her to the end, only avoiding a tie vote scenario because Moriah said she saw that fire in Kenzie's eyes, but really she was just salty that Charlie outlasted her. So I can't even give Kenzie the credit for earning that vote. As I'm writing this, Survivor 47 is still running. Haven't watched it, but like, yeah, it is still running. But for right now, Kenzie is definitely the worst winner of the new era. I don't hate her as a person like it might have seemed like in my Unhinged rant on Survivor 46 video, but it is what it is. Like, she wasn't good. Those are the player grades for Survivor 46. That's actually going to wrap up my coverage of Survivor 46. Like, I'm never going to talk about this season ever again. I just decided to make these player grades because I already had a bunch of notes from that Unhinged rant video, so I couldn't let them go to waste. So no more Survivor 46 talk, but I am open to making player grades for other seasons, so that's going to be in the works when I find a season that I really want to talk about. But yeah, that is all for now. Stay strong, stay brutal, because above all else, it's anything to win.